In the kind of town where folks still wave to passing cars and porch lights burn through the darkest nights, the idea of true evil seems almost laughable. Pine Hollow, Pennsylvania, was the kind of place where secrets stayed politely buried under gossip and casseroles left at the back door. Everyone knew Eleanor Tate, or thought they did. To her neighbors, she was the soft voice over the garden fence, the warm cup of coffee on a cold afternoon, the steady figure who never missed Sunday service, no matter how deep the snow piled on Willow Creek Road. But on a frigid January morning in 2021, the town's quiet illusion cracked like thin ice under heavy boots. It began with a simple favor, a neighbor's concern, a knock on an unlocked door, and a single step inside a hallway that should have smelled of furniture polish and lavender soap, but instead reeked of something far darker. What Helen Grady found that morning inside Eleanor's bungalow would stain her dreams for years. The sight of a kind old woman splayed in her own hallway, a pool of blood turning the worn carpet into a grotesque stain, was a nightmare Pine Hollow would struggle to wake from. The first patrol cars arrived before dawn fully broke. Within hours, yellow tape wrapped the modest home like a cruel ribbon. Neighbors huddled on icy driveways, whispering theories that swung wildly from tragic accident to monstrous stranger. But as Detective Melissa Crane ducked under the tape and stepped into Eleanor's hallway, she knew right away this was no accident, no random horror drifting in from the highway. There were no broken windows, no smash locks. Only a single kitchen knife missing from a block, muddy footprints leading out the back door, and Eleanor's lifeless body left with wounds so vicious they suggested rage far deeper than petty theft. Yet what the detective found in that tiny bungalow's freezer raised more questions than it answered. 2 small baggies of methamphetamine, wedged behind a bag of frozen corn. For a woman whose vices extended only as far as the occasional glass of sherry at Christmas, it made no sense at all. Her family would swear she never touched drugs, had no reason to. So why was it there, and why was it the only thing the killer seemed to know to look for? Over the next few days, Pine Hollow would trade rumor for revelation, a blurry figure on a neighbor's porch camera, a name whispered in the shadows of a rundown trailer park, a pair of desperate young lovers who knew more than they'd admit, a local handyman who thought a ride down Willow Creek Road would earn him a quick payday, and at the heart of it all, a young man named Alexis Romero, a ghost in a dark hoodie who carried a paper bag into Eleanor Tate's home and walked out with nothing but blood on his hands and terror in his eyes. This is a story of how Pine Hollow lost its sense of safety, how an ordinary front door became the threshold for a nightmare no lock could keep out, how kindness met cruelty in the cold hush of winter, and how a single brutal choice tore open a town that still wonders how well you ever really know the stranger next door. On the outskirts of Pine Hollow, Pennsylvania, the houses sit like faded photographs, stoic wooden frames weathered by snow and sun, neighbors who know each other by name, and front porches where people wave even if they don't really talk. It was in this sleepy stillness that Eleanor Tate lived her last days, and where her gentle life ended in a burst of chaos that Pine Hollow still whispers about. It was the cold that morning that bit hardest. Frost crusted the window panes and turned the yard silver under a dull January sun. For 3 days, Eleanor's mailbox filled up, flyers, bills, and the local paper stuffed tight, left untouched. Helen Grady, Eleanor's neighbor of 15 years, noticed the newspapers on her way to feed the stray tabby that Eleanor sometimes coaxed onto her porch. Helen thought little of it at first. Maybe Eleanor was sick, maybe visiting her sister 2 towns over. But when her phone calls went unanswered and the light on the back porch stayed on all night, worry began to gnaw at her. When Helen knocked on Eleanor's door that Sunday morning, she half hoped to see her friend appear in a faded cardigan, maybe with that raspy laugh and an apology for the mess. But the door swung open with a gentle push, unlocked like Eleanor always left it, and what Helen saw inside would change her forever. She didn't see Eleanor first, only the hall light flickering weakly, a dropped mug near the entryway, the faint smell of something metallic and stale. Then she stepped forward and saw the blood, a pool of it, soaking into the old hallway rug, and in the middle of it, Eleanor's body, face turned toward the door as if she'd been trying to reach it. Helen's scream echoed down Willow Creek Road, sending a pair of crows flapping from the maple tree by the driveway. When she finally managed to dial 911, Her voice shook so badly the operator could hardly understand. "Please, there's blood everywhere. Eleanor, she's just lying there. Please send someone now." Minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights washed over Eleanor's neat garden gnome collection. Police taped cordon off the little bungalow. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, hugging themselves against the cold and the horror blooming in their throats. Inside, Pine Hollow's small police force moved carefully through the rooms. There were no broken windows, no forced locks. Eleanor's purse sat on the kitchen table, money still inside. Only the knife, a long-bladed kitchen knife from her own drawer, was missing. In the dim hallway, Detective Melissa Crane crouched near the body, taking in every detail. The stab wounds were messy, quick. The killer hadn't tied her up. He hadn't bothered to cover his tracks. Well, either. Muddy footprints led from the back door to the frost-covered yard beyond. Detective Crane's mind turned over questions like puzzle pieces. If it wasn't a burglary, what was it? Who would kill Eleanor Tate, Pine Hollow's unofficial grandmother, and leave so many signs behind? But the strangest discovery waited in Eleanor's freezer. Tucked behind a bag of frozen peas were 2 small baggies of methamphetamine. Eleanor's family would later swear she never touched drugs, hated them, in fact. So why were they hidden in her house? The shock of it pressed down on Detective Crane, like a weight. In Pine Hollow, the crimes were usually simple: DUIs, petty theft, maybe a bar fight. Not this. Not drugs and murder in a kindly old woman's kitchen. As Eleanor's body was wheeled out under a tarp, Helen Grady stood on the porch, clutching her arms to her chest. She would later tell her husband she saw Detective Crane pause on the porch step, glance back at the crime scene, and murmur to herself, "Who the hell did you let in, Eleanor?" Outside, the frost began to melt as the sun rose higher. But for Pine Hollow, the chill had only just begun. The small-town gossip mill spun faster than any detective's feet could carry them that first week. Rumors bloomed like frostbite. Eleanor owed someone money. Eleanor had a secret lover. Eleanor was hiding something dark. Each theory was more absurd than the last, but none felt as terrifying as the truth slowly emerging through footprints, phone logs, and a single blurry video clip. Detective Crane sat in her cramped office 2 days later, rubbing her eyes raw as she watched the neighbor's porch camera footage for the 20th time. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., the night before Eleanor's body was found. The clip showed a young man in a dark hoodie, standing just outside Eleanor's front fence, shifting from foot to foot like he couldn't decide whether to knock or run. He carried a plain brown paper bag, groceries, maybe, or something else. He disappeared into the shadows a moment later. When he came back into view 15 minutes later, the bag was gone, and so, it seemed, was Eleanor's future. Detective Crane pushed a clip to her partner, Officer Darnell Briggs, who shook his head. Local kid, maybe? That gate's familiar. Within hours, they pushed the blurry image to every screen in Pine Hollow. Gas stations, diners, the high school security desk. By Wednesday, a name surfaced from a tired gas station clerk who recognized the hoodie. Alexis Romero. 25 spotty record. Petty theft. A few arrests for fighting behind the old bowling alley, and whispers that he become a small-time errand boy for meth runners drifting through Pine Hollow shadows. Crane got his address from the dispatcher, a rust-eaten trailer behind the old lumber yard, near the creek that everyone said smelled like rotting leaves in the summer. By the time she and Briggs knocked on the dented metal door, Alexis was gone. Instead, they found Holly Green, 22, chain-smoking by a cracked window, purple circles under her eyes. "Alexis? Haven't seen him since Saturday," Holly rasped, picking at her chipped nail polish. "He said he was going to make a quick pickup for some old lady. That's all I know." Detective Crane watched her carefully. "What old lady, Holly?" "How should I know? He never tells me nothing." But Holly's gaze darted to the stack of past-due bills on the table. Fear, desperation. Crane knew the look too well. She left her card and a warning. If Holly saw Alexis, if he called, texted, knocked once on the door, she better tell them. Pine Hollow had no room for secrets anymore. Back at headquarters, Crane spread out Eleanor's phone records beside Alexis's. One number kept popping up: Bryce. Crane's fingers tapped the table. She knew the name. Bryce Langley, local handyman, once caught sneaking tools out of a garage that wasn't his. They picked him up at a rundown motel where he was supposed to be fixing a broken heater, but instead sat drinking cheap whiskey from a coffee mug. Bryce didn't resist. His voice cracked when Crane pressed him in the interview room. Yeah, I drove him there. Alexis said she owed him for helping her get medicine. I waited in the truck. He came out quick. Looked freaked. Didn't say a word. I swear I didn't know what he did. The pieces clicked into place like icy dominoes. Eleanor, unwitting or not, was tangled in something rotten. Alexis was desperate, maybe high, maybe scared. And now he was loose, maybe armed, maybe panicking, maybe ready to do something worse. Outside the station, night pressed down on Pine Hollow like a suffocating blanket. Detective Crane stared at her reflection in the glass door, her badge glinting under the flickering security light. He's out there, she whispered to herself, and he's not done running yet. Detective Crane barely slept the night they brought Bryce in. She replayed his confession over and over, each word heavy with the weight of what they'd soon find. In Pine Hollow, when someone ran, they didn't run far. The woods behind Willow Creek Road stretched for miles, tangled with thorn bush and old hunting trails, and abandoned sheds where teenagers snuck beers when they thought their parents didn't know. The department set up checkpoints on the 2 roads out of town. Patrol cars rolled past gas stations, the old grain mill, the shuttered movie theater. Everyone knew Alexis was out there, somewhere between desperation and panic, maybe armed with the same knife that had ended Eleanor Tate's life. Crane's boots crunched through the frost as she and Briggs trudged behind the old auto shop 2 days later. The anonymous tip had come from a kid. He'd been poking around the rusted-out cars, hoping to find an old carburetor to sell, when he'd seen footprints near a forgotten storage shed. The prints were messy, but fresh enough to catch the detective's eye. "He's in there," Briggs murmured, hand on his holster. Crane didn't speak. She just gave the nod. 2 officers flanked the battered shed door, boots squelching in the half-melted snow. Crane counted down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. And then Briggs kicked the door in. Inside, the smell hit first. Stale cigarettes, sweat, mildew, a pile of rotting blankets. And in the corner, half buried under old tarps in a grimy sleeping bag, Alexis Romero. His face was pale, lips cracked from the cold. He looked up at the flashlight beam and flinched like a kicked dog. "Alexis, Pine Hollow Police, show me your hands." "Do it now." Crane barked. Slowly, so slowly, Alexis lifted his hands. Trembling fingers spread wide. One officer moved in and patted him down. There it was, the folding knife, tucked into his filthy pocket. The blade still faintly sticky with something no one wanted to name out loud. "Why'd you run, Alexis?" Crane asked as they cuffed him, her voice quiet but sharp. He wouldn't look at her, wouldn't look at any of them, only stare at the ground, like maybe if he didn't see them, this wouldn't be happening. They pulled him from the shed into the dawn's gray light. Word traveled fast in Pine Hollow. By the time they hauled him into the cruiser, a handful of neighbors stood on the edge of the lot, arms crossed, breath puffing in the cold. They watched as Alexis was driven away. Nobody cheered. Nobody felt safer. Not really. Back at the station, Crane sat across from him in the interrogation room. The clock ticked loud on the wall. Alexis kept his head down, hair falling into his eyes. "She owed me," he muttered finally. His voice cracked like old paint. "She said she'd help me get some stuff. I needed it. She said no. Started yelling. I didn't mean to. It just happened." He looked up at Crane then, eyes red and watery. She thought maybe there was regret there, or maybe just the empty fear of a man who realized too late that once blood is spilled, there's no scrubbing it clean. They booked him on second-degree murder. The next morning, the Pine Hollow Gazette ran a headline, "Local woman murdered, suspect in custody." And still, in the diners and grocery aisles, people whispered, "How could this happen here?" Crane didn't have an answer. Not yet. Maybe she never would. Detective Crane barely slept the night they brought Bryce in. She replayed his confession over and over, each word heavy with the weight of what they'd soon find. In Pine Hollow, when someone ran, they didn't run far. The woods behind Willow Creek Road stretched for miles, tangled with thorn bush and old hunting trails, and abandoned sheds where teenagers snuck beers when they thought their parents didn't know. The department set up checkpoints on the 2 roads out of town. Patrol cars rolled past gas stations, the old grain mill, the shuttered movie theater. Everyone knew Alexis was out there, somewhere between desperation and panic, maybe armed with the same knife that had ended Eleanor Tate's life. Crane's boots crunched through the frost as she and Briggs trudged behind the old auto shop 2 days later. The anonymous tip had come from a kid. He'd been poking around the rusted-out cars, hoping to find an old carburetor to sell, when he'd seen footprints near a forgotten storage shed. The prints were messy, but fresh enough to catch the detective's eye. "He's in there," Briggs murmured, hand on his holster. Crane didn't speak. She just gave the nod. 2 officers flanked the battered shed door, boots squelching in the half-melted snow. Crane counted down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. And then Briggs kicked the door in. Inside, the smell hit first. Stale cigarettes, sweat, mildew, a pile of rotting blankets. And in the corner, half buried under old tarps and a grimy sleeping bag, Alexis Romero. His face was pale, lips cracked from the cold. He looked up at the flashlight beam and flinched like a kicked dog. "Alexis, Pine Hollow Police, show me your hands." "Do it now," Crane barked. Slowly, so slowly, Alexis lifted his hands. Trembling fingers spread wide. One officer moved in and patted him down. There it was, the folding knife, tucked into his filthy pocket. The blade still faintly sticky with something no one wanted to name out loud. "Why'd you run, Alexis?" Crane asked as they cuffed him, her voice quiet but sharp. He wouldn't look at her, wouldn't look at any of them, only stare at the ground, like maybe if he didn't see them, this wouldn't be happening. They pulled him from the shed into the dawn's gray light. Word traveled fast in Pine Hollow. By the time they hauled him into the cruiser, a handful of neighbors stood on the edge of the lot, arms crossed, breath puffing in the cold. They watched as Alexis was driven away. Nobody cheered. Nobody felt safer. Not really. Back at the station, Crane sat across from him in the interrogation room. The clock ticked loud on the wall. Alexis kept his head down, hair falling into his eyes. "She owed me," he muttered finally. His voice cracked like old paint. "She said she'd help me get some stuff. I needed it." She said no. Started yelling. I didn't mean to. It just happened." He looked up at Crane then, eyes red and watery. She thought maybe there was regret there, or maybe just the empty fear of a man who realized too late that once blood is spilled, there's no scrubbing it clean. They booked him on second-degree murder. The next morning, the Pine Hollow Gazette ran the headline, "Local woman murdered, suspect in custody." And still, in the diners and grocery aisles, people whispered, "How could this happen here?" Crane didn't have an answer. Not yet. Maybe she never would. In the weeks after Alexis Romero's arrest, Pine Hollow sat in a state of hushed suspense. The newspapers carried his mugshot, a thin, ragged young man with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. Some townsfolk wanted him painted as a monster. Others, quietly, wondered if Eleanor Tate had secrets no one really wanted to face. The courthouse was small, the same place where locals fought traffic tickets and landlords argued over unpaid rent. But for the first time in years, every seat was full when Alexis Romero shuffled in, shackled at the wrists, eyes fixed on the floor. The prosecution painted him as a desperate addict who manipulated a lonely old woman, demanded money, then snapped when she refused. They showed the jury the photos from the hallway. The kitchen knife missing from her block, the baggies of meth tucked behind frozen peas. They brought in Bryce Langley, who testified with trembling hands, sweat beading on his forehead as he repeated his story. He said she owed him, Bryce mumbled, said it was just a quick pickup. "I didn't know I swear I didn't know." Holly Green took the stand too. She wore a borrowed blazer, her eyes sunken from nights spent avoiding reporters. She tried to defend Alexis at first, told the jury he'd been clean once, that the meth was never really his idea, that he'd just fallen in with the wrong people. But the defense didn't have much else. No forced entry, no evidence Eleanor attacked first. Just a handful of conflicting statements from a man unraveling in real time. Alexis's lawyer argued self-defense. He told the jury Eleanor flew at him when he asked for the money, that she scratched him, that he panicked. But the stab wounds told another story. Deep, deliberate, more rage than panic. The forensic pathologist described the angle of the wounds, the defensive bruises on Eleanor's arms. Through it all, Eleanor's family sat behind the prosecutor's table. Her niece, Anna, wept into a tissue each time the photos came up. Her brother, James, just stared at Alexis with a gaze so sharp the young man couldn't meet it. On the third day of testimony, Detective Crane took the stand. She told the jury about the footprints, the shed, the folding knife in Alexis's pocket. She told them about the freezer, how Eleanor's house had no reason to hold those baggies except Alexis's greed or desperation. She described the look in his eyes when they found him, the kind of look she'd seen before, the hollow realization that a single moment had burned an unerasable mark into someone's life. When the jury filed out, Pine Hollow waited, and when they returned, hours later, they didn't meet Alexis's eyes either. We find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder. The judge handed down the sentence a week later, 28 years. Alexis flinched when he heard it, but said nothing. He left the courtroom in cuffs, staring at the floor like he might find an escape route in the cracks between the tiles. Eleanor Tate's family gathered on the courthouse steps afterward. They thanked the reporters in polite, broken words. One of Eleanor's oldest friends laid a single daisy on the courthouse railing, the same kind Eleanor once planted in her window box every spring. Pine Hollow, people said, could breathe again, but Detective Crane knew better. Some shadows never really leave. They just wait for another unlocked door. Months later, the frost thawed and spring came slowly back to Pine Hollow. The snow melted off Willow Creek Road, and kids rode bikes past Eleanor Tate's bungalow like they always had. But the house stayed empty. The porch light that once burned every night remained dark, except when Anna Tate came by to water the neglected window boxes out of habit more than hope. Detective Crane sometimes drove by the old bungalow on her way home from the station. She'd slow down just enough to glance at the front steps, the garden gnome half buried in melting snow. She'd think about Eleanor's living room, the floral couch, the faded family photos, and the secrets that corner of Pine Hollow would always keep. Some nights, she'd dream about Alexis too. She wondered if he thought of Eleanor now, locked away in a cell with no freezer to hide behind. Did he see her face? Did he remember the warm smile that so many neighbors described? Or was he already burying her memory beneath excuses and half-truths to make the cold concrete easier to sleep on? Eleanor's family held a small service that spring. They gathered in the tiny church at the edge of town, the same church where she baked cookies for Sunday socials and helped fold programs for Christmas Eve Mass. The pews filled with people who remembered Eleanor as the lady who gave out candy on Halloween, who sat on her porch with a blanket over her knees, who asked about your mother even when she could barely hear the answer. Anna spoke last. Her voice trembled as she thanked them all for loving Eleanor the way they did, for seeing her kindness, not the ugly rumors that came after her death. She said she hoped her aunt was somewhere warm now, somewhere no shadows could follow. Detective Crane stood in the back pew. She didn't wear her badge that day. She just listened, hands folded in front of her, as the town said goodbye in the only way it knew how. Soft hymns, gentle tears, and promises to lock their doors a little tighter. That night, Pine Hollow fell quiet again. But if you drove past Willow Creek Road, you might see a single bulb burning on Eleanor Tate's porch. Anna turned on when she left town for the last time, a tiny beacon in the dark. And maybe, just maybe, it still flickers when the wind blows just right. A reminder that sometimes evil wears an ordinary face, and sometimes the softest souls leave the longest shadows behind. If you're captivated by real-life mysteries and chilling crime stories, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. There's so much more to uncover, and you won't want to miss a single case.